Hello, everyone. Andy Jacob here with the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. We have a very interesting show today. You know, many of you that watch the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight, you know that we love bringing in leading companies in their respective fields. And one area that we've been focusing on lately is the healthcare field, because so many people, especially now through the pandemic, are more interested in health than ever before. People want to know what's the newest and greatest things in health, what's helping people throughout the world, what type of technology is being used in different aspects of the health and medical field to make people better, to make people more healthy, to get people back on the road to recovery, to make people live a vibrant, amazing life. And that is the reason why I went through the Rolodex, and I've been able to bring on a very fascinating person on the show today. His name is Jeff Marx. He is the president and chief operating officer of Cerapedics. And let me tell you, this is a very fascinating company that Jeff and his team have built. It's an amazing technology. They're a world-class company with a world-leading offering in the bone grafting biologic technology space. It's so fascinating. I never knew how fascinated I would become about learning about bone grafting until I took a deep dive on Cerapedics. But Jeff, I wanted to start first off by thanking you so much for coming on the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Our deep dive with Cerapedics has been absolutely fascinating. What you've been able to do with the bone grafting and the bone grafting cell binding peptides, and the whole technology is so interesting. It's very technical, but I know that we're going to be able to simplify it for the viewers and simplify it for the people watching the show. But before we get started, let's pull the lens back to 30,000 feet and tell us about Cerapedics.
Yeah, so Cerapedics is a med tech company that's really in the regenerative medicine space. So our goal is to help restore function in patients with debilitating spinal disease. And so our technology it's an interesting drug device combination. The drug component is a little tiny peptide that is responsible for cellular attachment. And we bind that peptide onto a delivery carrier. When that's implanted in the spine for a spinal fusion, it will turn on the body's own biology, and it will cause this patient's own cells to regenerate bone to achieve a spinal fusion, and then all of it will resorb and will be completely gone. The patient will be left with function and with no remnant material behind, which is pretty exciting.
That's so exciting, Jeff. And this has a personal meaning to me because many, many years ago, my sister had a spinal fusion, and, you know, probably the technology back 20 years ago is not the same technology as it is today. And I would imagine that if she would have had that same fusion today versus 20 years ago, the outcome may have been different. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit and how this technology is evolving for all these people that need this spinal fusion and have this spinal pain and spine problems.
Yeah, so spinal problems generally are neurological issues. So because of an injury or degeneration of the spinal column, generally the discs, you will usually end up having the nerve roots or the spinal cord itself impinged. And when those nerves are sort of squeezed, they lose the ability to innervate the body part that they're responsible for. You know, most of us are familiar with sciatica or sciatic pain. So that's compression of the L4-5 nerve root. So what the surgeons do, they go in and fix that sort of mechanical problem by removing the bone or other material that's impinging on the nerve root or the spinal column. But in many instances, it's going to be unstable after they do that. And it's just going to continue down that degenerative pathway and get worse. So what they want to do is, in the case where they choose to do a spinal fusion, they will look to lock it in place mechanically, temporarily using hardware. So they can use an interbody device made of polymeric material like PEEK or metal or cadaver bone. That's just sort of a temporary bridge. And then they'll put in pedicle screws and rods in the back of the spine. Again, that's temporary mechanical fixation. What they really want to have happen is to get bone to regenerate across those two vertebral bodies. So if my hand are the two vertebrae, you want to get bone to grow across between them. So you have one big, tall, weird vertebrae instead of two. That biological fusion leads to long-term stability. So if they fix the neurological problem, that neurological fix is now permanent by virtue of that fusion. And that's really where we come in. That's what our technology is for.
It's so interesting. When I read through your writing and I read through all the research and all the technology that your company is providing, there's something that kind of resonated for me, and it's something how you simplified it to saying attract, attach, and activate. And it's a mechanism that your bone grafting biologic technology is able to, again, from a layman's standpoint, really help people and help the physicians help their patients in a way that really prior has not been able to be done before. So let's talk about that, because it's just so fascinating.
Yeah. So the biology of bone healing, bone regeneration, bone remodeling is incredibly complex. There have been lots and lots of different materials brought in to sort of enhance that. Most of them are kind of passive materials. There is a very powerful protein drug device that's incredibly effective, but it has some side effects. What we have been able to do is really try to understand how the biology works down on the cellular level. And all of these cells that are involved in making bone and remodeling bone, they respond to chemical signals of a variety of different types. And not through our research, but from one of the original founders of the company, we found that there's a segment of collagen. Collagen makes up the vast majority of all of our connective tissues. And in our native tissues, when it's healing, when it's remodeling, cells attach to a certain part of that collagen. He was able to identify what that was and make it synthetically, basically stitching together the amino acids in a test tube. And then when we put that onto the surface of our material and implant it, it will, as you said, attract, attach, and activate these bone-forming cells. So we're not trying to fool Mother Nature. We're just simply leveraging it and giving it its greatest opportunity to do what it's programmed to do. And all of these cells that we're interested in, they have surface receptors on the cell. They're actively looking for this P15 sequence. If we just simply give it to them in the place where we want it to be, it turns on the native biology. And that's why we get very rapid healing without sort of weird side effects that you can see with some of the other technologies.
So remarkable. The way that the entire medical field is continuing to improve is just incredible, with the use of technology and really smart people, smart scientists, smart medical practitioners. It's really unbelievable. Now, Jeff, when I was a young child, 2.5 years old, I was swinging in a cherry tree. I don't know what I was doing up there, Jeff, but I fell and I shattered both of my legs as a young boy. And I was in cast up to my hip for, I think, 6 or 9 months. It was not a very good time to be in a cast, because that was the time that I was growing and my bones were, evolving, and my bones were maturing. But thank God I can walk, and I'm doing well. And, that was just a little hiccup along the way, but it made me think about it. Is the I factor bone graft also used in other areas of the body besides the spine?
Absolutely. So in the United States, we have a different regulatory pathway for this category of products than in Europe and other places. So here it's considered a drug device combination, and it requires an FDA IDE clinical trial. So that's 7 years, $40 million to get a very specific narrow approval or indication. So in the United States, iFactor is currently approved for single level fusions in the neck. Outside the US, in Europe, other markets in Asia, it's really approved for anywhere in the skeletal system. So the majority of bone grafting that's done is done in the spine. And so that's where the majority of our experience is. But it's also used in foot and ankle, in upper extremities, in long bone, in fractures, in revisions of fractures that failed to heal. You were fortunate as young kids have fantastic bone metabolism, and given good mechanical fixation, they tend to heal. Adults, particularly those with poor metabolism or osteoporosis or other metabolic diseases, sometimes we'll get what's called a non-union. You break the bone, instead of it healing, you just end up with soft fibrous tissue in between. So that's a big problem. What is done in those instances is the surgeon will go back in, they will scrape out all of that soft tissue that's in the way, and they can implant a material such as iFactor. In fact, we have a small series of that application exactly from Spain that's been published. So it's used throughout the entire skeleton. Our focus here in the US is in the spine. So our current iFactor is approved for use in cervical fusions, fusions in the neck. But we have developed a next generation version of the product. That's currently being studied in an FDA IDE trial in the lumbar spine, much larger opportunity, huge amount of disability and cost to our healthcare system and loss of employment, et cetera, because of lumbar spinal issues.
Wow, Jeff, that's remarkable. And for anyone that hasn't had a neck problem or a lower back problem, those are some of the most painful areas to have a challenge in your body. And they're just debilitating to such a great degree in so many different cases. And, we talk about the technology and we talk about what you're doing with, the iFactor, and we talk about Cerapedics. And one thing that comes to mind, Jeff, that's so important is, while you and your team can talk about the technological and medical aspects of what you're doing at iFactor, for days on end, the real thing that I think makes your company great is the way in which your entire team really thinks about the end user, thinks about the way in which you're able to provide this relief and this much needed sort of healing to your clients. So let's talk about that. Where does that come from, Jeff, from your company at Cerapedics, where so many people and everyone on the team, they're really focused on the technology, but it's because of the fact they know that it's going to provide such great relief to the end user?
Yeah, I consider myself extraordinarily lucky that my whole career, I've really been able to focus on not only doing something that can, build a couple of fantastic companies, but help people. And, it's not too many people that at the end of the day are willing to throw themselves at something because they know it's going to make a difference each and every single day. So, I think in our industry, it's pretty easy to always think about the end user, the customer, the patient. So there's a patient laying in an operating room who's had a debilitating problem. Our interface is not with the patient, but we're always thinking about the patient and giving them the best outcome. Our interface, our customer is actually the surgeon, so the spinal surgeon in most instances, some cases an orthopedic surgeon outside of the US. And we want to make sure that not only do they understand the benefits of the technology that's going to help them help their patients, but do it in a way that makes it easy for them, that's not going to make it more challenging than it needs to be. Yeah, so while our focus in all of our activities is really trying to give the patient the best possible clinical outcome, the patient's not our customer, and that's not really who we interface with. Our primary customer is the spine surgeon who's doing the procedure. So not only is it important for us to help them understand the benefits of this technology that's going to help them do the best they can for their patient, understanding its benefits as well as a safety profile, but to make sure that they have a good interoperative user experience. And so that's our primary focus. The interesting thing about our market, though, is, there are multiple decision makers here. So the surgeon isn't really always necessarily the one that can say yes or no. You have to start with them. They have to understand the benefits of the technology. Then they go to their hospital, and it's a combination of the hospital through a value analysis committee or perhaps a group purchasing organization. There are multiple decision makers, and they have different things that they're worried about. They may not, in some instances, understand the real clinical benefit, and they're just looking at price. And so that's, where we have to spend a lot of time with our team in the field, educating all of those various constituents.
That's very interesting. When we think about the world today, Jeff, when we think about technology and we think about medical technology and medical advancement, everybody's talking about fast, simple, and easy. And when I think about the physicians that you approach and the physicians that approach you and say, I've heard about, iFactor, that's great reviews. Everybody's talking about it. Everyone, wants to engage with Cerapedics. What's the benefit for the physician to use the iFactor bone graft technology?
Yeah, so we have a clinically proven technology, through multiple prospective human clinical trials. So we have genuine human evidence that it works. This bone grafting market is very, very strange in that there are multiple different regulatory pathways depending on the type of technology and its mechanism of action. Most don't require human studies. Most products get to the market just based on animal studies, which is not necessarily translatable to the human experience. And there are, in fact, a category of products that don't require even animal data. They really just have to be demonstrated that they're following certain guidance documents. And so there's a lot of products in the market. There's an awful lot of noise and marketing speak. And so part of our challenge is to sort of cut through that, which we do using education and clinical evidence. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much something costs if it doesn't work. Something that's ineffective is overpriced at any price. And so it's really all about the clinical data and helping patients get better.
This is very interesting. And for the entrepreneurs watching the show, there's something to learn from what Jeff just mentioned with regard to what in basic parlance would be called the sales cycle, because we have to talk to the physicians. They have to understand why iFactor is, the technology for them, what the benefits are for them, why it's going to be great for their patients, why it's going to be great for their practice, why it's going to do what the others can't do in terms of helping their clients, which are the patients that they're doing the bone grafting on. And then it sounds like Cerapedics has to take it sort of to the next level above the doctor, if you will, to the hospital level or the administration level. So that's sort of a complex sales cycle, if you will, yeah. Jeff. So do you have different people that talk to the physicians versus the administrators of the hospitals?
In some instances we do, and in some instances it gets even more complicated than that. So a lot of hospitals are members of group purchasing organizations. And so in some instances, they have sort of some local command and control, but that's done within sort of the context of broader approvals, requiring something to be on the list of things that they can look at from their parent GPO. And there's a bunch of different forms and flavors of all of those things. So, we have predominantly in the US, we have independent distributors. So these are folks that carry a number of different companies' products, including ours. They're generally our primary interface with the surgeons, first and foremost. We, because of the huge educational component of our sales process, I and others on our team, we have a whole host of resources that travel and go work with our local distributors to help, work with and educate our surgeon partners. And then the sales process through the hospital, normally a surgeon has to step up and take the product through the value analysis committee. And we have a team of folks that can work with them, work on the contracting side of it, as well as work with the GPOs and the IDNs and, as it gets more complicated. But it really takes a team of folks, including, some really dedicated local folks who have relationships and are in the operating room every day with a surgeon.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I know that, your corporate culture starts at the top with you and your C-suite executives. Everybody is passionate about doing the best they can using the technology and making sure that the medical field and the approach that iFactor gives the physicians is top notch and always available for answering questions, and really do a tremendous job, which has made you a leader. Now, Jeff, when I was growing up, I played a lot of sports. Besides falling out of the cherry tree when I was two and a half years old, I was always breaking a bone or a finger. I broke my arm one time. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, from the technology standpoint, is there going to be a day where, a child or even adult breaks a bone and somehow, some way through technology, there's almost an instantaneous healing or something like that, where the healing process is going to speed up as technology advances?
Yeah, I don't think we're ever going to reach a point of it being instantaneous, but as technology continues to improve, we are able to achieve faster healing, faster fusion. In fact, in our current FDA study with the lumbar product, one of the things that we're evaluating in that study is speed of fusion. And we've designed it in such a way that we believe we're going to be able to demonstrate that. And our comparison is to autograft using the patient's own bone. And so that has been historically the gold standard. And if we can demonstrate that our new product fuses faster than autograft, I think that's going to be pretty darn compelling. There's a couple of competing challenges in terms of creating the right mechanical environment. So bone likes to be under compressive stress and repetitive stress. We talk about people need to engage in load-bearing exercise or they lose bone density. That's for that reason. And it also helps with healing. So you want to be able to have some compressive load. If you put something in there that is strong enough to bear load, it's kind of in the way of the biology. So you really have just completely diametrically opposed goals in terms of achieving, mechanical function and then eventually achieving the biological function. And that's why we will typically use temporary fixation, metal plates, rods, screws, et cetera, to facilitate, but they're outside of the place where the bone is forming. But I do think we're going to continue advancing the ball down the field and improving the speed of healing and the degrees and types of healing that we can achieve. There are a lot of risk factors for healing of bone, diabetes, obesity, osteoporosis, smoking. And one of the things, we believe so much in our technology that in our current lumbar fusion study, we are actually enrolling high-risk patients, which is not typically done in these types of studies because of, you don't want to spend tens of millions of dollars on a study and then fail. But we're so confident that we are enrolling high-risk patients. And I think at the end of the day, surgeons should be confident that the technology is going to work in their patients that they're worried about, that this is going to be the go-to technology.
Jeff, it's so interesting. I never looked at it like that. I never really understood that or even knew that, the bones need to be under some kind of tension along the way. So walking and putting some pressure on the bones is a great way to keep them healthy. That's why I would imagine, when you're in the hospital, they want you out of the bed as quickly as possible to get the body moving and get those bones being compressed in a way that's going to keep them strong and keep on building them up. So that's very fascinating. There's just so much lower back problem. I mean, it seems like wherever you go, whoever you talk to, somebody's out with a lower back problem.
Yeah, the spine is an incredibly complex structure. And all of our load is borne down through the spine. So, you start at the top, the human head is heavy and it's balanced on the neck. The spine actually goes through three separate curves. And you can think of the spine as being a three-part load system. So think of the spinal column itself as being sort of the compressive component in the middle, but that's supported in the front and the back by two sort of compressive columns. So in the back, there are a series of paraspinous muscles, et cetera. And in the front, it's your abdomen. And if you keep your core healthy, that unloads the spine. And so I think, in our society, there's an awful lot of folks who don't take great care of themselves, either because it's not their preference, it's not what they're choosing to do, or just their lifestyle doesn't allow. And so, and also, we tend to do what we're doing right now. We spend a lot of time sitting in a chair, and you're not sort of building the core and loading your spine the way it wants to be. So just people's spines, we just naturally degenerate over time. So the spinal disc is a really interesting hydrogel material. And as we get older, it just sort of loses its ability to absorb water and stay spongy and squishy. And so every single one of us, once we reach middle age, we may or may not have any back problems, but we certainly have meaningful degeneration of our discs. So as those discs start to lose their cushioning ability, the vertebral bodies sort of get down closer to one another. And if you look from the back of the spine, there's posterior elements sticking out the back. These guys start to come down closer to one another, and they start impinging on those nerve roots. So part of it is just, an aging population, and then all of those risk factors we talked about. So, you're not really going to be able to fix those societal things. And there are still plenty of, folks who are really healthy and doing everything right and still end up with spinal challenges.
Wow, Jeff, that's very interesting. We all need to, do our ab work and stay fit and keep walking and do some plank once in a while, I would imagine, to keep that abdomen nice and strong to provide that strength for the vertebra. It's very, very interesting. I love health. I love learning about it. So many people in today's, age versus, let's say, 30, 40 years ago, they're going to listen to a show like this and they're going to be just fascinated because so many people are interested in their health and so many people are interested in the health advancements. And one thing that comes to mind, Jeff, when I think about Cerapedics and the iFactor bone graft and what you're doing with all your new studies is our population in the United States is just aging.
Yeah.
And we're aging rapidly in the next 20, 30 years. I don't know what the statistics are exactly, but there's going to be so many people of advanced age that companies like Cerapedics and the iFactor bone graft technology is going to be more important than ever before. So what do you have on tap for, thinking forward for all of us people that are getting older and in 20, 30 years are going to be 80, 90 years old, at least in my case?
Yeah, I think not only is our population aging, but our expectations as to how we age are changing. I think you look at, 75-year-olds today, they're out playing golf and riding their bikes, and they expect to be active and healthy. They're not willing to put up with what we thought was normal aging years ago. So, with the next generation version of our product that we're currently in the FDA study, we're optimistic that we're going to be on track for an FDA approval late 2024 with that technology. That's going to enormously expand our ability to treat different types of spinal problems. I think it's going to be a huge advancement in terms of how surgeons place it intraoperatively, how it stays, and are confident that it's going to be where it's going to be. The development process there, not insignificant. So we started almost 8 years ago on that project. So with the conceptualization of what that was going to be, its development to validation, we've gone through manufacturing, scale up 5 separate animal studies before we were able to file with FDA to even start the human study. So, an enormous amount of work and effort, but I think at the end of the day, the payoff is going to be huge. We're going to be able to help a lot of patients and help a lot of surgeons to help their patients.
That's very, very encouraging and very powerful. I wanted to take our conversation, Jeff, at the end of the time that you have allotted. And by the way, thank you so much for coming on the show and slicing out some time for us. I think I'm keeping a little bit over, but I wanted to get into entrepreneurship a little bit. You've led teams for some very powerful companies. You've earned a Ph.D. in ceramic engineering from Missouri University of Science and Technology. You're very accomplished. And we have some younger entrepreneurs that may be watching the show, Jeff, and they may be saying to themselves, I'm listening to what they're doing, and this is like, futuristic, super scientific, high technology, amazing things that they're doing at this company. And I've got my startup, and I may be just starting off, and maybe I'm hitting a pothole in the road, and maybe this is the first time our younger entrepreneurs have ever hit a pothole, or maybe they freaked out a little bit, or maybe they're in the freeze frame, or they can't get through the wall. So I'm hoping, Jeff, you might be able to give some words of wisdom maybe to the people watching the show that maybe have a startup or younger entrepreneurs that you can share with them what it takes to get through those potholes, coming out the other end in a powerful, meaningful way based on your experience of what you've done in your career.
Yeah, I mean, some advice I always give to young folks when I have the opportunity to mentor them is start by getting comfortable being uncomfortable. So, whenever I'm in a position where I feel like everything's good, it's all under control, I get nervous. So I was really, really fortunate in my career that I sort of got thrown into the deep end early on. So I started up with a startup within a startup where I built a lab and hired a staff, and I was responsible for planning and business development and, intellectual property and everything. There was nothing when I got there. And so early on, I had the opportunity to sort of build some functions and build processes. And I probably did a lot of them really poorly, but I grunted through them and I got it done. Then later, when I joined Orthovita, I was just incredibly fortunate to have a mentor who recognized my ability to sort of learn and problem solve and just grind things out. So the beginning of my career was really mostly focused on R&D. But as Orthovita grew, anytime we sort of had a hole or needed to build a new department or a new process or something, I just got sort of shoved at it. And so I figured it out. And, a lot of the time it was ugly at first and inefficient and did things wrong or had challenges along the way, but you just sort of keep your head down and focus on the end goal. Try not to get hung up on the wrong details, because there's details that matter and there's details that don't matter. And I think that's one of the biggest things that's hard to learn along the way is parsing between those two and picking and choosing. So, if you're not trying to do hard things, you're not going to accomplish anything interesting or valuable. And if you're not comfortable being uncomfortable, you're not going to be trying those new things. You're not going to be breaking new ground, and you're not going to be learning and growing. And so, if you haven't tried it, it looks scary, just suck it up and go do it. That's sort of my biggest piece of advice. Sometimes it's going to go poorly, but you're going to learn. And next time you do it, it's going to go much better, and you're going to have a better perspective. And but build teams along the way, and find people that know more about other things that you do, and just sort of share your passion for learning and trying to make important things happen.
That is great advice. If you're not encountering those potholes in the road, if you're not encountering some roadblocks, you're just not pushing hard enough. And I think that really resonates for me and resonates for all the people watching the show. What you're doing at Cerapedics, Jeff, with your team, the remarkable team you've assembled and the great technology that you've been able to put together and continue to advance on, is very, very astonishing. And it's really resonates for me. And I'm sure so many people that just are so thankful that we have so many technologists that are looking at ways in which to not only help us with our health, but in the unlikely event that we need some help along the way because our health declines, we have people like you and your technology and the doctors and physicians and administrators behind it all to make sure that not only we have the best healthcare in the world, but the best way to keep ourselves moving forward in a meaningful way, staying young, feeling fit, and feeling healthy. And I want to thank you so much for that, Jeff. This has been a remarkable interview. I'm so thankful I've had an opportunity to book you on the show. And Jeff, I wanted to thank you for coming on the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and sincerely hope folks find some value in it.